6 biggest money laundering examples. Most money laundering operations never make national headlines, even when they're detected by the authorities. Many perpetrators successfully evade accountability, but plenty get caught. These are among the most notorious money laundering operations of the past 100 years. 1. Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, 2006 to 2017. The crux of the original Manafort and Gates indictments, according to NBC, both the men generated tens of millions of dollars as a result of their lobbying work for Ukraine. They hid the payments, from 2006 through 2016, by laundering the money through scores of U.S. and foreign corporations, partnerships and banks, according to the charges. The Manafort indictment singles out $18 million that Manafort concealed from the U.S. government in a bid to avoid taxes. According to NBC and other contemporaneous reports, the charges were brought in part to avoid potential statute of limitations issues, which would prevent prosecution of older crimes. The superseding indictment filed in February 2018 included additional financial crimes, including bank fraud and wire fraud, related to the pair's alleged money laundering activities. When Gates pleaded guilty, the special counsel's office dropped all charges in the superseding indictment. Manafort and Gates both pleaded not guilty to the October charges. Despite Gates' February 2018 guilty plea, Manafort continues to maintain his innocence and has publicly dismissed the case as a politically motivated sham. Trial on the original charges is scheduled for October 2018 in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. A trial date has not yet been set for the February 2018 charges against Manafort, which were filed in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. 2. Tom DeLay, 2002. Manafort and Gates aren't the only recent U.S. political figures to face accusations of financial crimes. U.S. Representative Tom DeLay, RTX, the House Majority Leader at the time, was indicted in 2005 on charges of conspiracy to violate election law, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and money laundering related to campaign fundraising activities during the 2002 election cycle. The conspiracy to violate election law charge was later dismissed, but the money laundering case proceeded, and DeLay decided to resign from Congress in 2006. For NPR, rather than face a long trial in the public eye. The ordeal was indeed long. In November 2010, a jury in Travis County, Texas, convicted DeLay on both remaining counts. He was subsequently sentenced to 3 years in prison and 10 years probation. DeLay's legal team successfully appealed the conviction, and the criminal case officially came to a close in 2014. 3. BCCI, 1980s. Even during its heyday, London-based Bank of Credit and Commerce International had a shady reputation. According to a former employee quoted in a New York Times report published in 1991, as revelations of BCCI's decade-long embezzlement scheme came to light, it was common knowledge within the bank that there were fraudulent loans. According to the New York Times report, BCCI took money from more than 1 million depositors around the world and became a personal piggy bank for its Arab and Pakistani owners and its favored customers. Those favored customers included some of the period's most notorious criminals and dictators, including Saddam Hussein, Manuel Noriega, and members of Pablo Escobar's Medellin drug cartel. According to congressional testimony cited in a contemporaneous Time magazine article, BCCI also maintained accounts for the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Council, both of which took advantage of the bank's ask-no-questions policy to finance a variety of covert activities, including the infamous Iran-Contra affair. As losses from fraudulent loans mounted, BCCI took increasingly desperate measures to paper over the trouble, using customer deposits to make interest payments on other loans, making new fraudulent loans to shareholders for the express purpose of buying bank stock. In the summer of 1991, international authorities seized the bank's assets and shut down its branches. In December 1991, Deloitte and Touche, the liquidators charged with winding down the bank's assets, pleaded guilty to a slew of criminal charges brought against founder Agha Hassan Abedi and an associate by U.S. authorities in New York. Abedi was never brought to justice, however, thanks to his native Pakistan's refusal to extradite him to face trial in the U.S. Legal action and financial clean-up related to the BCCI debacle continued for decades. Deloitte and Touche settled a lawsuit against auditors in 1998, then labored to recover depositors' funds over the subsequent decade plus. Deloitte finally closed the case in 2012, per The Guardian, more than 20 years after BCCI's collapse. 4. Liberty Reserve, 2008 to 2013. Some early cryptocurrency proponents got more than they bargained for from Liberty Reserve, a Costa Rica-based financial website that facilitated international cash transfers and cryptocurrency conversions. With low transaction fees and no identification verification requirements, Liberty Reserve was a magnet for hackers and other criminal types. By the time the U.S. Secret Service arrested 5 of the site's masterminds in 2013, Liberty Reserve had facilitated some $6 billion in suspected money laundering transactions, according to Fox News. Unfortunately, legit users got the short end of the stick. Fox News talked to a Texas-based small business owner who lost $28,000 when Liberty Reserve collapsed. Some measure of justice was served, though. In 2016, Liberty Reserve founder Arthur Dovsky pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiring to commit money laundering, according to the U.S. Department of Justice. His sentence, 20 years in prison. 5. Standard Chartered, 2001 to 2007. British banking behemoth Standard Chartered scheme made BCCIs look like child's play. During the 2000s, a rogue unit schemed with Iran's government to hide more than $250 billion in illegal transactions for nearly a decade, according to The Guardian. The transactions helped Iranian officials and prominent Iranians evade U.S. sanctions on the theocratic regime, degrading the sanctions' effectiveness. In a damning report, the New York State Department of Financial Services also alleged that the rogue Standard Chartered unit also sought to do business with other U.S. sanctioned countries, including Libya, Burma, and Sudan. Standard Chartered quickly settled the charges, paying $340 million to the New York State Department of Financial Services and more than $300 million to other regulators. The settlement compelled the bank to implement and follow strict anti-money laundering protocols. Said protocols apparently weren't strict enough. Just 2 years after the original settlement, Standard Chartered paid another $300 million to settle allegations that it violated the agreement with the New York State Department of Financial Services. 6. Nauru, 1990s and early 2000s. We've seen individuals mastermind audacious financial schemes to cover for illegal activities. We've met global banks that condone international fraud and deception on a massive scale. Now, we meet the rarest of all white-collar criminals, a nation-state that's all in on money laundering. That might be unfair to the fun people of Nauru, a tiny South Pacific island nation described in a 2000 New York Times feature as one of the most obscure places on the planet. The steadily declining population now numbers about 10,000. Some 90% of which are unemployed. Nauru was once a hive of activity. The island had one of the world's richest deposits of phosphate, an important commercial fertilizer ingredient. Foreign mining interests laid waste to the 21-square-mile island's interior during the 20th century, supporting a vibrant, if quasi-colonial, economy. But the boom times were gone for good by the late 1980s. Prompting an increasingly cash-hungry government to reinvent Nauru as an offshore banking destination and tax haven. The government went so far as to offer passports to foreign nationals, for a hefty upfront charge, and allowed anyone to charter a bank with a $25,000 down payment. At the peak, as many as 400 banks operated out of Nauru, 1 for every 30 people on the island, give or take. By the 1990s, Nauru was awash in Russian mob money, at least $70 billion, according to the New York Times. The situation came to a head in 2001, when Nauru became the first nation-state sanctioned by the International Financial Action Task Force on money laundering. Facing down bankruptcy, The government responded with tough anti-laundering legislation and took steps to diversify its economy, building a controversial but lucrative offshore detention centre for the Australian government. Though the Nauru and banking industry's Wild West days are well behind, problems persist. In 2016, escalating laundering concerns prompted Australian banking behemoth Westpac to cease doing business with the Nauruan government, according to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation.